What is up, everybody? I know I said there was going to be no show on Tuesday with Ryan traveling, but there was a bit of a interesting practice down in Orchard Park today, and I will get to the circumstances of why we're doing the show the way that we are doing it. But this is Shout, a Buffalo Bills football podcast, brought to you as always by Tops Friendly Markets. They have the best burger deals in town with over 30 ready-to-grill burgers. Tops is the place to pick out the juiciest, most delicious burgers in town. From beef and turkey to chicken and veggie, you'll find something for everyone. Taste the flavors of the world with unique toppings and twists on the classic burger. Tops World of Burgers is yours to enjoy. I got Jon Scott here from Spectrum Buffalo. He covers the Bills and was out at practice today. I was not. I was late. I got there for the last 20 minutes or so. The kids had a dentist appointment. I got a lot of concerned DMs and texts today about, are the kids good? One of them being from John, no cavities, no cavities. So this was a big time morning. But man, this was a eventful practice, John.
Finally is what I would say. Finally, I know you have amazingly enough conjured together daily observations and made it really interesting and things like that. And I've done my best on our website to do the same. But if we're just being frank, it's kind of been a snooze fest up at Fisher, and they come back and kick things off back home in Orchard Park with easily the most intense practice we've seen to date.
Right. And I want to start with, just before we get into the details of everything, and there's some things, like everybody knows, we're in that different stage of camp / the preseason where the reporting guidelines are a little bit more strict. What do you think this means? I feel like this is up against, and we'll talk about this, maybe we can even talk about it right now, some moves in the division. The Jets are this super hype team coming in to training camps, adding Aaron Rodgers. They go out and they sign Dalvin Cook. The Patriots are adding Ezekiel Elliott. We can argue how impactful that'll be, but the Miami Dolphins are expected to be really good. The Bills are kind of entering the gauntlet, which is the 2023 season. Their schedule is super tough. The division's better. How much do you think that this is just intensifying things, knowing what's to come, now 23 days out from the opener?
I honestly just think it was more of a product of the sum of the parts and the cast of characters that were kind of at the heart of this. They've kind of been percolated and some have boiled over a little bit, even when we did see things at Fisher. But I don't necessarily think it's, oh, these moves happened with two of our division rivals, and so the very next day we're going to ratchet things up. And let me just be clear, just because I'm saying this is the most intense practice we've seen to date, and it was kind of a snooze fest at Fisher, that doesn't mean that they've been coasting. To me, right. It's more of a product of, what Josh Allen is, what Stefon Diggs is. I even think I know what Gabe Davis is. What Dawson Knox. Yeah, it's cool to see Dalton Kincaid in there, and then see guys on the defense and whatnot. It's such a veteran team that's carrying over guys that we just don't have any questions about. That where's the room for things to pop off to really make things interesting? Thankfully, no one got hurt. That's often a big thing that moves the needle at training camp as well. So you don't need fights to make things interesting, but you also don't need a bunch of things popping to necessarily say that it's been a good, productive, or whatnot training camp here. So I don't think it had anything to do with the tempers maybe rising a bit this morning with anything on the outside. I just think maybe it happened to be the day. It happens at times. It just maybe came a little later on here in the training camp process and moved past their time at St. John Fisher.
Adam on YouTube says, sorry, bro, I thought you were Ryan's twin for a second there. We do have the new look for Jon Scott. I think you're wearing it great, man. I think you waited way too long to go with the look. You've gotten compliments from Shaq Lawson. Who else has pointed out your
Dion Dawkins says, yes, I'm a man now. That's comforting. That's big news. Is that a compliment that I'm a man now and I'm about to be 39? According to Dion, I've known him since 2017. What has he thought of me since then? Even Sean McDermott, a fellow hairless guy at the top of the dome, he says it's a good look for me too. So yeah, the compliments, I'm feeling myself now, and honestly, I don't even think about it at this point.
No, it's a good look. And so let's get into kind of the newsworthy headlines of this practice. And it started pretty early. I mean, I was, on my way to the facility, and you texted me, man, you picked quite the practice to miss. Take us into the start of it and where things kind of began.
Yeah, it was a big, you're kind of just looking around, you don't expect anything. And this big to do gathers in the middle of the field between almost the entire team, and then you hear a bunch of shouting, and then you just kind of see a helmet flying off and kind of flailing around, and then the next thing you see is someone gets pancaked by Deion Dawkins, and then as things kind of start to unravel and unwind from this ball of Bills players all gathered together, you see Tyrel Dodson heated and needing to get restrained by linebackers coach Bobby Babich. And that really was the noteworthy aspect of this is I can't tell you who's throwing the helmet. I can't really tell you what incited all of this. I just kind of saw the middle and the end of it. And Dodson needed some time to cool down here. And then everyone kind of got back to the business at hand with practice.
Yeah, and we can get into Dotson here in a moment because it's been an interesting, couple of days for him. Josh Allen was asked about this after practice, and he, of course, downplayed it to, every degree that he could, because I mean, this is this time of year football. And he wanted even as far as to say, you need practices like this as a team, both sides of the ball, offense and defense competing, trying to get the best of each other. With Dotson, I get the sense that there's a level of frustration overall. Probably not, we asked to talk to him after practice on Sunday. He politely declined. And I'd imagine what goes into that is a level of frustration that maybe he didn't play as well as he wanted to on Saturday against the Colts. And, this is a huge opportunity for him. Terrell Bernard is nursing a hamstring injury. We all know about those kinds of injuries. Sean McDermott has gone as far as to say is like, we do know, like, we don't know. We don't have any definitive timetable. So without any real pressure, with the way that Balin Spector has been kind of notched down in the competition over the last couple of weeks, this is a huge opportunity for Dotson, and maybe he's just feeling the pressure of it a bit.
Yeah, maybe it's just simply this is one of the groups, and now that Sean McDermott alluded to going into the preseason game, of no one's really asserted themselves one way or the other, good or bad, to separate these position battles and middle linebacker being in there. And Dodson obviously got into the mix, thrust into there because of the injury to Bernard. And as you put, we don't know a timeline, just saw him walk out in street clothes at the back end of practice. But beyond that, that's all we know really of the extent of that. And so Dodson, this is his opportunity to really grab hold of this thing. And maybe he doesn't feel, or maybe the optics of what you saw in the game on Saturday would tell you he hasn't done that to this point. It doesn't mean he won't, but he's also kind of been in the mix of things. I know people at training camp saw him kind of in some of, not to this extent, but some other incidents where things get a little heated in the middle of the heat of action up at Fisher. And so maybe this is an edge he's trying to find or whatnot. I have no idea because we haven't heard from him yet, but you certainly would know that you would think he would feel the pressure naturally because it's all on him right now. And if he can't capitalize and even someone else potentially now has an opening behind him, then you would feel the heat and think, wow, I have to be at my best now because I have the best opportunity I'm going to get.
Let's take this one step further and like look ahead and say Tyrel Dodson doesn't do enough to win the job. And now we're probably going to be in a situation, depending on what happens with Terrell Bernard, the Bills are going to be in a situation where they might have to go with him anyway because of a lack of options. Now, the Dorian Williams conversation is really interesting because, I do think, like, we've heard Brandon talk about this over the years, like those positions I think are more positionless than ever before. Like what you could potentially do with Matt Milano, playing him on the inside in the middle because of the different things they ask him to do. I know a lot of emphasis is placed on calling the defense and having the green dot and all the stuff that's been well chronicled. But what do the Bills do? Do they lean into a veteran like AJ Klein? Do they hope and wait for Terrell Bernard to come back and maybe him offer? Or do they kind of go out and maybe get aggressive and look to bring in somebody now that we've kind of gone down the road and nobody still here in the middle of August is separating themselves from the mix?
It's weird because they have time, but they don't have time, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. I still think while a hamstring injury, you want to be super cautious at this time of the year, and it's more of an open-ended timeline, at least the way it's being presented right now. Does that mean that they have to hit the urgency button and the panic button if Bernard's not, let's say, ready for week one? I don't necessarily think so. I don't. It doesn't appear the way that Sean very vaguely referenced it, but it doesn't seem like there's going to be something that's going to have Terrell Bernard out for the first 6 weeks of the season. I don't anticipate something like that. So maybe you just roll with what you got. I mean, they're deep to some extent at that position, and while I agree, I think both the linebackers from a role of X's and O's maybe do some of the same things. I do think at least in regards to Dorian Williams, I just don't think it's reasonable. And I don't think maybe they have shown that they have the confidence that he could play middle linebacker and just to call the defense from
Right.
just that standpoint here. I know he flashed in the preseason game, and I think that's what you hope to see from him because you know the physical talents are there. You want to see him fly around and not be thinking too much. But I think it's a lot to ask Dorian Williams to push into the middle and look all of these guys like Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, and tell them all where to go. I just don't think that would be in the cards from the jump. So I think, yeah, I think you'd have to look at Tyrel Dodson, AJ Klein, and maybe Balin Spector or something as the one should Terrell Bernard not be healthy enough to go from the jump. I think those are the options. I just don't think it would be necessary to go outside for something that maybe you would view as more short rather than long term.
I think this also kind of puts in perspective the way the Bills talked about Tremaine Edmonds when he was here and how maybe from the outside he felt like this polarizing figure where fans wanted more, media wanted more, but it was something where he played at such a high level, offered you so many different things as a coverage linebacker, a tackler, his speed and quickness at his size, and then also being able to, call the defense and know where everybody's supposed to be. And they spent a lot of time building that with him. It's going to be interesting to see how this thing plays out at middle linebacker. I don't want to wait any further before we get into the interesting news of the day that Brandon Shell, I was told, he wasn't out of practice today and that he's intending to retire, which is, listen, he's 31 years old, and that's, I texted this out to our Shout Insiders group this morning, early afternoon. And one of the questions that came back was, is this something that is usual at this time of year, or is this unusual for somebody at the middle stage of training camp or towards the end to just retire like this? And I'm like, well, you go back to Vonta Davis, who was a year younger, 30. He got all the way to the first, game or second game of the season and decided to retire. So this is something where I would imagine Brandon Shell came out. He gave it a go. He'd played, I think, 9 seasons. He's had a lot of snaps in this league, looking like he's going to call it a career.
And to be honest, what does this really have an effect outside of just a numbers game for the Bills? I don't think it really matters. I didn't necessarily forecast him at this point from what I've seen as someone who would be in serious contention to be one of their probably 9 offensive linemen on the team. I think to see Ryan Vandermark get some run before even David Questenberry at left tackle in the preseason game, you probably look at those two and Tommy Doyle as the options at tackle. And so yeah, good for him or whatever the circumstances are. But in terms of really moving the needle for this football team and their roster construction that's going to be necessary in a couple of weeks, to me, it's just kind of getting another body out of the way that probably would have been on the chopping block anyways.
How aggressive does Brandon Beane get in finding a veteran offensive lineman? I think there's serious question marks with David Questenberry. And to your point, yeah, Ryan Vandermark looked great at left tackle. Didn't look as good at right tackle. So I think, maybe you're slotting him in there. That Tommy Doyle can play both spots, so he's probably in the mix too. But again, coming off that injury, suffering the injury in the game the other day, his availability is always a question. I'm really high on Richard Garage. Now, based on what we've seen this summer and then in the first preseason game, most of what I've seen from him has been on the left side too. So what happens if Spencer Brown, who from all the people I talked to at practice today, other reporters, he had himself a really, really good day of practice. And he's somebody that I feel like continues to get more and more comfortable. if Spencer Brown goes down, what are the options to replace him?
I think it's a very legitimate question, and you laid it out with all of the options that are currently on the roster pretty well. But they always seem to show patience. And then we've just learned, and we learn it every year this time of year, this Bills offense is not something that you can easily come in off the streets and grasp. Just because you may be a veteran doesn't mean you automatically can be a set it and forget it. This guy's been playing in the league for 8 years. He can be the swing tackle. They just had one that seems to be intending on retiring. And from our vantage points, I won't speak for you, but it wasn't very inspiring when he was on the field to this point of training camp. So they tend to, even though we, with such an interesting viewpoint from our perspective, look at things and always thinking, what can they grab from the outside? That's not the best options that they usually tend to go with. And I think that while I also agree that David Quessenberry hasn't been great, you'd like to see better from a guy now in his second year in the system. I think there's serious value to, they saw what he could be last year. They brought him back, which shows that they maybe were more comfortable than maybe others would be in him returning to that swing tackle role. And so between Quessenberry, Vandemark, and Tommy Doyle, I think those are the options you're looking at as your backup tackles and the guy that would be next in line as the swing.
Mm-hmm. And some people having a back and forth in the comments about Ryan Bates, who can play right tackle. Now, it's been a long time since he's played anywhere outside of the interior. And again, like Bates, if he doesn't win the right guard spot, and I think we're in a place where that's more realistic than ever after Torrance's performance in the preseason game. And we'll see how that battle develops. And the next time we get a chance to talk to Sean, if there's been any movement there. But, I think Bates, he's so vital as a potential backup center if he's in a backup role that I don't think they even roll him out at tackle. And plus, he doesn't really fit their size standards. I mean, they've leaned into those big, tall, high res score, lengthy tackles over. I mean, Garage, Vandemark, Doyle, they're all absolute massive dudes.
Yes, and just to put a bow on this, the Bills just announced Brandon Shell has officially been placed on the reserve retired list. So
breaking news.
He intended to, and he did. But you're right. From a size perspective, I mean, the Monstars would maybe have a tough time with the lineup that the Bills offensive line could put out there on a basketball court. These guys are 6'6", 6'7", 6'8". I mean, it's wild to think. Now, obviously, like Luke Tenuta a year ago was in there, and you're looking at him, and you're looking at Doyle and Spencer Brown. You're like, my goodness, he's like the largest men I've ever seen on a football field. So I would agree. Yeah. I would not put Bates there as like the swing guy. I think he would fit in as he could play guard, he could play center. And then if all hell breaks loose, like in the Miami game a year ago, and we're down 2 or 3 guys, he can play on the outside in a super, super pinch. But I would agree. Size is what they have shown to want. I mean, Deion Dawkins isn't a small guy, and he pales in comparison to a lot of the guys that are behind him.
Summer is heating up, and so are the deals over at Topps Friendly Markets. Quench your thirst for savings and get $5 of cool cash right now. Get 1 point for every $1 you spend on the brands that you love until September 2nd. Pepsi, Mountain Dew, Gatorade, Tim Hortons, you name it. Ask your cashier to redeem your points for a coupon offer your next shopping trip. All right, let's get into Stefon Diggs a little bit here before we wrap this thing up. I think it was us talking on the sideline about how good he has been throughout training camp. I mean, he just reminds you how special of a talent he is. And that ends up meaning a lot of defensive backs and defensive members of the Bills, they end up hearing it. And they go back and forth, and the competition level was super high. There was a few times today that it felt like things were bubbling over with Diggs.
And it started before teamwork even began. When I was getting video of the guys doing the individual sessions, even within just the wide receiver group, and then certainly when Josh Allen and the quarterbacks came over, Diggs was shouting after catching almost every pass. Mm-hmm. And at first I thought he was like, I couldn't decipher what he was saying, but he was amped. And then to your point, I think some of these DBs, whether it's out of necessity or their style, or this is how they feel they need to combat a talent the level of Stefon Diggs is that the physicality ramps up, and there are times maybe Stefon believes and feels it's too much, and or it's just it borders maybe something where he feels maybe it could go a wrong way, and maybe someone gets hurt or whatnot. I'm not gonna go into the thoughts of Stefon Diggs, but he's an intense dude, and I think it's great to see after everything that happened in minicamp and all of that, he comes back and we know the intensity of Stefon. It has been consistent, even more so than we've seen in the past. Of every day, he attacks it as if it's the last. Every drill, he's coming 100,000 miles an hour. This is an all-pro, one of the best wide receivers in football, and he is playing every single practice rep like he's the 10th wide receiver trying to fight to make this team. That's his DNA. And I think that that's what has made him great. And I think it's something that also, again, he's trying to raise the level of intensity for everyone. And so if he's going that hard against, it doesn't matter on the defensive side of things, maybe that'll elevate them. And naturally, in the heat of competition, sometimes that's going to kind of boil over. And I think we've seen a few instances with a different person, from time to time who's been going against Stefon Diggs. I think it's great. And even if it carries on some longer than others with certain guys, I don't think it means just disgruntled Diggs is back or anything like that. I think it's just part of his DNA, and I see no problem with it.
I mean, his brother made national headlines earlier in training camp when he yelled some type of obscenity at Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott, like the franchise quarterback in Dallas. So there's obviously, like, listen, when you're between those white lines, there's a level of competition that these dudes feed off of. Like when we talked to Josh about it afterwards, like it's almost like he was looking at us like funny, like, is this really like a thing that we're talking about? Like that's practice. Like we're competing. Like Micah Hyde with an interception at one point. Having that entire secondary back and healthy and competing every day with Gabe Davis and now Trent Sherfield over here, Kincaid and Knox. I mean, that's the highest level of competition you can achieve until you get to the regular season, because let's be honest, there's probably not going to see many more series with all of the ones the rest of this preseason. And it was actually the one exchange. It was Saran Neal who had a good rep against him, right? That kind of bubbled up there for a few moments.
Yeah, and bubbled up afterwards as well. I mean, those guys are just, I don't think it was, again, like, I don't like you. I just think
Right.
Stefon, he holds himself to a high standard, and I think he also wants to make the other guy better. So if he's like, well, you were doing this wrong or whatever it may be, it's as much, I think, to say, hey, I got you. You got to step it up, as it is, hey, this is maybe a way that you can get better as well. I love it. I mean, I always look at these situations with any player who gets super intense in the moment, and I'm a nobody recreational sports guy, basketball, softball, whatever. And I get into it with guys at time to time. And I'm not nearly the caliber of athlete and certainly at the level of competition as these guys. So I can only relate, though, to some extent, because I get fiery and it helps me become a better player at the level I'm doing it. So I can completely understand why a guy like Stefon Diggs or anyone out there with the Bills in moments like this where things kind of get heated, why it actually can be a benefit. And when Josh says it after practice, I agree with him.
So Pops Mafia over on YouTube is asking, do the coaches like or dislike the intensity? I'm not going to speak for them. I think we'll get a chance the next time we talk to Sean to ask him about that. But in the past, I think he's always been pretty forthcoming in the fact that, football is a passionate game. And when you get out there and you're having these competitions, especially when it starts in that one-on-one setting where I feel like, you go one-on-one, wide receiver, DB, good on good. I mean, you are not only doing that for yourselves, you're performing for coaches, front office, teammates. Like everybody in your world is watching in that moment how that rep goes. And it's like, it shines a spotlight on things. So it ratchets up the intensity even more. I don't have a huge problem with it. And I also think this is really good for other guys that are competing for roster spots. Like We mentioned Tyrel Dodson at the top. I mean, look at guys like Kyer Elam and Christian Benford who get these fiery exchanges with Stefon Diggs and Gabe Davis on the regular throughout training camp. That goes a long way to improving their game as well. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think Sean probably didn't mind it.
I think Sean and the coaching staff, just based upon their responses to similar type practices and intense moments in the past, they're perfectly fine with it. They've been around the game and in the NFL long enough to know at any level, but especially the NFL, this happens. It's a matter of time. It's training camp. You just don't want it to linger or affect the flow of practice. So make it so guys aren't getting out of what they're supposed to do simply because they're ticked off at another guy. That's
Right.
just not what you want happening. And so Sean has always had a great grasp on the team and navigates practices to make sure that things remain on the straight and narrow path here. And so I think from his and other coaches' perspective, it would simply be, yeah, we love intensity. We need intensity. This is just part of the game. Let's just make sure that it doesn't detract us from accomplishing what we hope to accomplish just for this day, this period of practice and whatnot.
Important report, Tommy Doyle was out there practicing today, as was DJ Dale. I know both of those guys suffered contusions on Saturday. A couple players that Bills fans have been tracking. Dale returning to practice today. And then Reggie Gilliam was also back out there. Damian Harris still kind of working his way back. You said that he was doing some stuff off to the side. Saw him kind of wrapped up on the knee later in practice. And then no Terrell Bernard. Ilianku still not back. And Cam Lewis also as well. Tyler Matakevich returns today. That's another one that we could kind of throw out there. I want to shift gears here and talk about one more person in particular. And I really want to talk about him with you because if I spotted it right from across the field house, it was somebody you were having a little one-on-one chat with today. Was that number 87?
Correct. Who
it was. All right.
I found out Andy Isabella grew up 20 minutes from where I grew up in the Cleveland area, the east side suburbs. He was in Mayfield. I was in Solon. I was there much before him because there's about probably like at least a 10-year plus age gap between the two of us. When I was in high school, we would beat the snot out of his high school. Apparently, according to him, much later, that was not the case. But I just was interested to talk to him. I liked the signing because I liked the player coming out of college. I thought that it was an interesting guy. Anyone who runs almost a 4.3 flat 40 is just super interesting to me. But as we all know, and I'm sure you've said here on this show and I've said on mine, is it's interesting. A second round pick is now trying to fight for his life to make his fourth team in 3 years. So I wanted to sit down and kind of see what he thinks of his path, what he thinks of his opportunity, and how he's kind of handled not living up to what a second round pick would be.
I'm interested to watch that piece when it does air. So make sure you check out John's story with Andy Isabella. When will that be coming out, you think?
Should come out on Thursday evening. I'll put the link out to the story because I don't know if you have to be verified now to go over the 220 or whatnot of video, but I am not. So I'll just have to put the full video on our web story and you can click it. I'll probably throw in some extra quotes. I know Josh Allen was asked about him. I'm sure Sean McDermott will be as well. So I like to sometimes beef up the print version from strictly just the video because even though we're 24/7 over at Spectrum News, there are some time constraints. I can't just go endless here on an expose of Andy Isabella, but there's some good stuff about the mental side of what he's gone through in terms of the pressures of being a second round pick after only having really one or two offers at the Division I level coming out of high school, being a smaller guy that's looked upon and being thrust into the expectations that come with a second round pick and battling through, at least to this point, not living up to them.
So let's end with this. What is the path to a roster spot for him? Because Ryan and I have talked about this quite a bit. And I feel like he falls into a couple of different buckets. First of all, like he feels to me from just watching him in a limited amount over the summer here as a really reliable guy. He obviously fits best in the slot, which is complicated because they pay all this money to Deontay Hardy, who I don't feel like has really fulfilled any role yet. Specifically, now they might have one in mind, and we might not see that until the regular season. Trent Sherfield could play in the slot. If you knew him to, he could play outside. Khalil Shakir is listed on the depth chart as the backup to Deontay Hardy in the slot as well. But I feel like Isabella, like, I don't think it's a perfect comparison because he's much faster than Cole Beasley. But I do think watching him run routes, it feels similar in terms of his suddenness at times, in and out of breaks. So I wonder if that's an area where they say, all right, we're going to really lean on Deontay Hardy to be this specialist as a kick and punt returner. Maybe we look at a seventh receiver because I think Justin Shorter is going to play special teams, and put Andy Isabella in a role where they're actually asking him to go out and play snaps and be a part of the offense. What's the path to that for you?
I think the only path for him to make the 53 is someone gets hurt of that group that you mentioned. Deontay Hardy is going to have a role. I think he maybe fits more of the gadget type role here. And I think that in some instances, his breakaway speed and the dynamic ability that he has with breaking it loose, I think it's something that could be really valuable. How often is that going to be showcased on the field? I don't know. But Ken Dorsey did say in terms of, hey, if someone wins the return battle, what does that mean for their role in offense? He said it means nothing unless a guy like Hardy rips one off 65 yards and is just gassed and he can't get back on the field. To me, and then Sherfield, I think, has looked great, and his flexibility to be inside and out, I think he's in there. And obviously he was a free agent ad. To me, it would almost come down to Shakir versus Isabella. I know a lot of people in my mentions through the preseason game were down on Khalil Shakir. He had the tough drop, but he'd made some good plays. He's just been inconsistent, but that doesn't mean that they're going to give up on a 5th round pick before their second season even begins. So to me, from one of those three, they would have to get injured before roster cutdowns, because even with 7, like, what happens with Von Miller? Even if Von's on the pup and that frees up a roster spot, there's so many defensive ends that they have to make some decisions. And I don't think you would keep a 7th wide receiver who has a similar skill set to 2 or 3 others that you already have on the roster and lose one of these defensive ends. I just don't foresee that happening. And finally, I just think while he's flashing here, it happens every preseason. You see some guy on your own team, and in this instance, the Bills, you remember he was a 2nd round pick. You get enamored by the 4.3 speed, and you think there is no way this guy can get on the practice squad. Meanwhile, he's a former 2nd round pick with 33 receptions in his career, who was released by the Ravens at the end of July. I think sometimes we get blinded and lose an idea of, well, this guy's so good, he's going to get automatically picked up by anyone. And I think oftentimes we find 2 days after cuts are made, it's not the case. And so to me, I think the most likely path is Andy Isabella is on the practice squad. And maybe at some point this year, whether it's injuries or whatnot, he's the one who gets called up and finds his way onto the roster, because I think he's a good player. I like what I've seen. I just don't think they're going to commit to this guy over those other 3 because of their situations.
Indeed. Head over to Tops Friendly Markets right now. They promise you fresh meat and fresh ideas for how to cook it every single day. Check out some of these deals. The top round steak, $5.99 a pound. The boneless center cut pork chops, $2.99 a pound. Or get some fresh chicken leg quarters for $1.29 a pound. The deals are endless. Head over to Tops and check out all of their great deals. All right. This has been great, Jon. Thank you so much for helping me out, tagging in on a day where I was slacking, getting the kids over to the dentist office. I actually got a text on our insider line. It said, next time you're at the dentist office, tell them to speed it up a little bit because you got to get to practice. let everybody know where they can find your work.
Yeah, at Jon Scott TV is pretty universal across all social media platforms. That's Twitter, X, Threads, which I'm still not really grasping too well. Facebook, Instagram, I'm on all of those. And like I said, the Andy Isabella piece should be coming out sometime Thursday afternoon.
Awesome stuff. He's Jon Scott. I'm Matt Parrino. Ryan and I will be back tomorrow night, regularly scheduled program. Shout on Wednesday night. Take care, everybody.